Glad to have you with us for the Public Square this week. I'm Wayne Shepherd here with Dave Zanotti, and the team around the table is Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, Rob Walgate, and our producer, Alan C. Duncan. We're going to talk about the news today, Dave.
Wayne, I love this broadcast. I really do. Dawned on me. We've been in radio with the Public Square since 1989.
That's cool. That's very cool.
You and I have been doing this. I think people, in case they forgot the story, you and I met out doing fundraising events for local radio stations. That's
literally on the air. I sat down next to you while you were talking on the air and started horning in on the conversation, and that's how we met.
And it just kept going from there. And it was, I had great amount of respect for your work. And so I knew who I was getting the privilege to sit with, and that meant something to me. And following up, of course, I can tell you now, which I probably haven't said out loud before, and I should have, is that I wasn't, not only was I not disappointed, but you were so kind in the follow-up. You were not the big head superstar, okay? you were, and what ended up happening is we just started talking as friends, and the next thing you know, we had another invite. Yep. And I think you and I have probably been involved in raising money for radio stations somewhere in America, probably almost every year since that time. I know we just got done with the WBNH radio program in Peoria, and what a great event that was.
I know. I always enjoy it. They invite me every year, and they say, "Why would you come every year?" I say, "Why wouldn't I come every year?" You know,
seriously.
Yeah, and of course, it's actually a bad set of terms on that. We're not raising money because nobody can. You can't make anybody give anything, and we don't raise funds. All we do is share the blessings and the value and the experiences that we've had in working with Christian radio stations and nonprofit radio stations as well, and commercial radio stations over the many years now, where the Public Square Network now is touching onto 238, we just did a count, 238 radio stations and outlets across the country.
Beautiful.
And we are blessed by everyone. Your program, First Person with Wayne Shepherd, okay? You're now on, how many stations is that program on?
Last count I had was 520. So
520. See who the big dog in the room is, Rob? Did you catch that, Alan?
That's the big dog, right?
No. Well, it's not the highest number of stations for a program, but it's the little program that could, because I don't buy any time. There's no, it's all given. You know, it's all a gift. Wow. So,
isn't that amazing? So we are so thankful for the opportunity to meet with people in different formats around the country on different stations, and to do our very best to tell the truth and pass along words of encouragement to people, particularly in America, that there is a reality in faith, and that it's not blind faith. It's directed toward the revelation of the Creator, the one whom the founders of America called upon, and that he still gives us real answers to real questions. So I love the privilege that we have to do this. And I'm so grateful now for the many ways that these programs continue in their extension. A lot of people, between 520 and 238, that's a lot of radio. And there's a lot of people every week who come across these programs. But then there's people who come across them online or who share them online. So there's an extended life. When you and I got started, we were like snipping tape off of reels and building
trying
carts.
Not to cut our fingers with the razor blades. Yeah.
Yes, and even Jeff Sanders had a little time spinning some wax right at a station years ago. So we know the old technology, we know the extensions of the new technology, and the windows of opportunity. Now, not only do you not pay for time on First Person, but you don't charge anybody. I mean, you don't have a subscription service, right?
No.
We don't either.
I tried my hardest to come up with a business plan for the show to make lots of money, but reality is it didn't make anything, and that's fine. As my wife says, it's my ministry, so.
And I agree. I agree with Becky. She's right. I mean, it's your ministry to the world. It's your ministry to the world, and it's Christ's ministry working through you. And that's a beautiful thing. That's a wonderful reality. So I love doing this. So today we're going to talk about media.
Okay.
And I think it's important for people to understand our confession so that they will understand that this is not the typical moment in which people who are viewed to be on the right take out their sledgehammers of all sizes and begin to smash against the pillars of the radical left media, the corporate media in the United States of America, because that's where people would expect us to start the conversation. Instead, I've got to start a conversation with a confession. The other day, I'm preparing for radio in the morning, and I'm looking through different sites that I look at. And we each kind of have an assignment at the Public Square. Everybody's got different media outlets to examine and to review and to stay in touch with so that we can then cross-pollinate each other, because there's just too many to follow. So we take a team approach on it. And so a lot of us in that list will have a Fox News, and I've got the Fox News phone app. So I hit the Fox News phone app, and up came a load screen. I think that's the right term. And if it loads fast, it's a second. It's almost like a subliminal thing. And if the site loads a little longer, it's going to be there for 2 or 3 seconds. But it's a load screen that simply has the words on a little graphic, "The world according to Fox." Now, I would say, what? So I quickly shut down the screen, closed the app, did it again. And then for the next 10 minutes, because it was loading so quickly, I kept trying to capture a photo on my phone of that screen, because I couldn't believe that any media outlet anywhere would dare to come up with a logo, a banner, a tagline, whatever you want to call it, a motto, "The world according to blank." The world according to Fox. It shocked me. So I immediately sent it around to everybody and said, make sure I'm not the only person who's seeing this, because this is amazing. Now, why is this significant? Over the years, we've come up with one thing, a number of things we've observed that are pretty much across the board universal. And one thing I can tell you is, if you get a chance to talk to pastors and you have a chance to talk to them privately about the mindset of their congregations, and what are people coming into the room in their minds and their attitudes? What's on their mind? What's their heart? What are they coming into Sunday school class, into deacons meetings with, into small groups? What's the mindset that people are coming into when it comes to their concerns about America? Virtually everyone will tell you they're dominated by Fox News. People that consider themselves coming at things from a conservative point of view, Fox News is the dominating mental force in their point of view. And I thought that's always troubled me, because we've been behind the scenes. Rob, you've been on Fox Business a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you've been there. You've been in studio. I've been in studio with Fox New York, and we've been in studio on Supreme Court decisions and cases. We've had dinner with people who work for Fox News. We've observed Fox News. We've read about Fox News. And I'm going to be honest with you, they've always made me very uncomfortable. I actually did a debate prep for a major candidate in a major race years ago with Roger Ailes. There was 4 of us in the room, and Roger Ailes was one of them. And if people aren't familiar, Roger Ailes was the guy who built Fox News for the Rupert Murdoch family. Right? So we've never been on their employment. We've never been signed a contract. We've never taken any compensation. We've never carried water for them, which is important, because right now I'm going to ask the question out loud with affection and hopefully some good humor. Have these people lost their minds? The world according to Fox? Are you kidding me?
Well, can I play devil's advocate for just 1 second here?
You do that so well.
I'm just trying to be nice. So, I mean, if someone asked me my opinion about something, or on the radio, I would say, well, according to Jeff, my opinion is blah, 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 blah. So, I mean, I give out the world according to Jeff all the time. I've got a worldview, and I'm not shy about letting people know about it. So,
with greatest respect to your intellect, Jeff, which I do treasure, and your scholarship. Yeah, but that's just you. Of course, everybody's got a right to their own opinion, but nobody's got the right to their own world. I mean, that's the point. When you say the world, that's everybody.
Well, and when you say the world, I think sometimes people look at it and say, well, they have the ability to define right and wrong. They have the ability to define good and evil. And Now you start walking down some murky paths.
Well, it's ironic because, look, so, what about Disney World? Yeah, full disclosure, I'm a fan of Walt Disney. The original Walt Disney, the one that's not frozen, the one that's in the grave, the original Walt Disney and his story of his story of American life and how he came together. And I've studied his way. It's a fantastic story. It's an American story. The Walt Disney story is real. Okay, so would I have ever called something Walt Disney World? No way. But with all honesty to Walt Disney, everybody knew that Disney World was make-believe. Nobody was trying to say, let me define reality for you based upon Walt.
I actually think that the tagline, "The World According to Fox," has an element of honesty in it, in that those two words in the middle, according to. Mm-hmm. One of their prominent programs has an often cited phrase, fair, balanced, and unafraid. So someone is setting what the balance is. Someone is setting what the fairness is. So someone is predominantly creating a perspective that this is our interpretation of the world.
Okay. All right, let's get into that in a minute.
All right, we'll do it after our first break here on The Public Square. Thanks for tuning in this week, and maybe you're listening online. That's great, too, thepublicsquare.com.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Welcome back to The World According to the Public Square. This is the weekly edition of our program. I knew that would get you, Dave. I knew that would get you.
Well, Melanie brings up a good point. At least Fox is being honest. They're going to tell us what the world is according to them. And that's a very correct statement. And my chagrin, my shock, my discontent, whatever it is, criticism about this is, let's go back to Disney. Walt Disney World is based on fantasy. So it's a world of fantasy. We all know that. Fox News is telling us that they're telling us what is real. The world according to Fox. So there's that old statement. I think it goes back to John Adams, and it's been said for a long, long time, and it's kind of a myth in America. Everyone has the right to their own opinion, but nobody has the right to their own facts. Is that how it works? Mm-hmm. There's a premise in that, is that when we come into a courtroom, in a court of law, that there are certain things that we've all agreed upon that are true, which is why we're able to take an oath, because we have a common understanding based on self-evident truth. That's a missing link in the founding era that people don't reflect on very often, but the framers of the Constitution were often concerned and stated in both policy, practice, and in doctrine that if you don't come at the world from the same commitment to reality, how will you ever determine justice in a courtroom if everyone's entitled to their own version of reality?
Dave, along those lines, it makes me think of the phrase that's become common. How many of you have heard the phrase, "Tell me your truth"? What's your truth? That's my truth.
Right.
And what sometimes, to be as fair as I can be, sometimes what they might mean is, this is my perspective of what happened. But the way that it's talked about, it makes it sound like, and it begins to just plant those seeds of doubt in people's minds that, maybe there's multiple truths out there. And that's not helpful for getting out what you're talking about, Dave, that we all need to agree on what reality is.
Well, now, this isn't, the world according to GARP or the world according to me.
Oh, I was going to ask about that, Dave. Do you think they're referencing that as like a pun or some sort of a joke?
I don't know.
That's an old book and an old film, so I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if they're referencing it.
Or they're trying to get to Forrest Gump. I'm not sure where they're going on this. But what I'm certain of is that the founders and framers of this country built the premise of the American experience on self-evident truths. And self-evident had a multiple meaning. The first concept philosophically in a self-evident truth is that it needs no further proof. It is true. it is true truth, as Dr. Glover would tell us, and that it needs no more verification. We hold these truths to be self-evident. In addition to that, there is the acknowledgement that the consensus of the culture is that this is a self-evident truth. In other words, this is real. So let's say that we're all in a courtroom and someone holds up a 2x4 that is clearly cut from a tree, and we all say, this is a piece of wood. Is there anyone who objects to that statement of reality? Francis Schaeffer, in his works, would often refer to a chair, that the chair is there. The chair is made of wood. We all know that A is the chair. The chair is A. The chair is not B. The chair is not a non-chair. These are the building blocks of creating a philosophical, which turns into a psychological platform for human reality. What is real? So the concept of establishing what are the parameters of reality is philosophically critical for all of law and certainly for the establishment of a nation. So what was the role of the media in that situation? Because let's remember, from the Declaration flows the Constitution, and from the Constitution flows the Bill of Rights. And who do we find in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights? The media.
The press.
Mm-hmm. There they are, right? Freedom of the press. What other business enterprise was ever given First Amendment, first protection rights? An enterprise, freedom of the press. So did you ever stop to think about how important that is?
Well, there's that expectation that they would provide the truth and be transparent, but it wouldn't be your truth or my truth or their truth. It would be the truth. There could only be one truth. So,
or else it wouldn't be true, right?
Yeah, that's why they had that protection. And as far as it goes in relation to Fox, the world according to Fox, I think the one thing Fox has embraced is they're not everyone else. So therefore, they feel like they can have that, it's according to us, whereas we've seen that media split where we have multiple truths out there. So people just run in the opposite direction.
I sometimes wonder if the press back in the late 1700s, through the 1800s, even through the early 1900s, had not been really more rooted in facts and evidence, if they would have been given that level of protection in the First Amendment.
Oh, what a great question. Let me put the B side on that record. Also, if dueling wasn't legal, would we still be in the same position? Because lying was universally rejected in that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the idea was, it didn't matter what your religion was or lack thereof, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor was sort of a big deal. And again, if maybe you didn't believe that to be the case, then maybe you would find yourself on a morning like Alexander Hamilton staring down the end of a gun. I mean, people took telling the truth with a high level of accountability.
And today, you've got communication professors at major universities who are dispensing with neutrality, dispensing with objectivity. And one such person, his name is Fred Turner, he says journalism is by definition an activist occupation. And another one said that journalism should free itself from objectivity to develop a sense of social justice. So they are morphing what the press, i.e. the media, back at the time the First Amendment was drafted, into something completely different.
Should they be freed from facts?
Well,
I mean, what if facts contradict what your narrative is?
Well, I think sometimes facts did contradict what the narrative was, and that's why you saw the government get so involved, especially over the last couple of years in regards to COVID and what was happening.
Melanie, you're referring to that Stanford Daily article that we sent around? Yeah, that this is journalists need to be overt and candid advocates for social justice, and it's hard to do that under the constraints of objectivities. The quote from the article said Ted Glasser, communications professor at Stanford, in an interview with the Stanford Daily. We got to put that link onto the show notes here because this is a remarkable article where the leadership, the college leadership, is basically saying, "Hey, journalism as objective truth-telling, forget that. It's about your truth and about political activism.
Dave, do you think that it would cut both ways for this professor? I'm thinking about David Daleiden, who him and his team several years ago went undercover and spoke with people at abortion clinics and found out what they were doing with fetal tissue and fetal remains, human baby remains, let's say.
Right.
And he was raided, his home was raided by the government. The Attorney General, I believe, had the raid, which I think was Kamala Harris at the time. And all his stuff was taken. He was doing undercover journalism work. His computers and his hard drives were taken from him. And he's been in legal battles ever since. Thankfully, he was able to back up that material because he's smart. But that sounds like he was doing quote unquote activist journalism, and he should be free to do it.
Cheryl Atkinson for CBS News can tell you the same story from about 10, 12 years ago during the Obama administration. They were going into her computers because she was telling a narrative different from what the government wanted to hear.
I think the elephant in the room then is, who is going to be in the position of deciding what is just, what is necessary.
Well, I think we're sliding here just a bit, and it's a good slide. The question is there ever a role for journalism to be activist in the pursuit of a truth that is out there? And it may be fueled by political energy, by personal conviction. I mean, for example, take a look at the Watergate situation. You had two reporters that were hyper aggressive, and in essence, they knew they were in the process of the potential of pulling down an entire presidential administration. But it is what they believed the truth of the matter called them to do. So were they active as journalists or were they following a story? I think there's always going to be a question here. But the difference is, are we pursuing the facts and pursuing the truth wherever they may lead?
Right.
Or have we moved to an era now where that's secondary? That's like the second step. The first step is, where do we want the show to go? Where do we want the article to go? What's the point we're trying to make? Then let's fit the story to the point. Does that make sense, that there's a difference?
Or who do we want to get elected? Who do we want to get elected? I think it's become
there. We go. What's the impact of the story? Right.
So what we have is a dispensing of objectivity in what you just described. When there is no objectivity, you want to get to a predetermined outcome. The term activist or activism is a driving force to get you in one direction A. So if you stumble across something that's counterintuitive to that narrative and might switch you over to direction B, you ignore it. Objectivity is gone. Activism is you're only pursuing one blindsided narrative that you can't be distracted by truth to take you into a different direction.
That's a good line.
You can't be distracted by truth.
I think activism in journalism can be a good thing. I mean, let's go back to the 1850s when there were journalists. I think of William Lloyd Garrison saying slavery is evil. Let's get rid of slavery. And he had all kinds of facts on his side. I think the problem arises is when somebody, either in government or in big tech, say that only one view or only one form of activism is allowed, and we are going to deplatform everybody else who has a different idea than mine.
We're going to take a break. Already a great discussion on the Public Square today, and you're not going to want to miss the rest, so stay with us. If you have to leave for any reason, make sure you listen to the rest online at thepublicsquare.com, or also make good use of that smartphone app, The Public Square.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
Back with you on the Public Square now with the team here. I'm Wayne Shepherd with Dave Zanotti, Jeff Sanders, Melody Elsie, Rob Wolgate, and Alan C. Duncan. I want to enter a book into the conversation I read 15 years ago when it was published. I haven't read it since. I need to go back to it, but I have it somewhere in my shelf here. But it was written by a professor in Florida, at least at the time he was a professor in Gainesville, He wrote a book called How the News Makes Us Dumb, The Death of Wisdom in an Information Society. And he makes several points here. Just a little summary of the book. He talks about how up-to-the-minute news reports on radio and television oversimplify complex realities. He argues that news began to make us dumber when we insisted on having a daily dose of it. Now millions of columns, inches, and airtime hours must be filled with information every day, every hour, every minute. The news, he says, becomes the driving force for much of our public culture. News schedules turn politics into perpetual campaigns. News packaging influences the timing, content, and perception of government initiatives. News frenzies make a superstition of scientific and medical research. News polls and statistics create opinion as much as they gauge it. Lost in the tidal wave of information is our ability to discern truly significant news and participate in true community. Pretty good.
Well, Wayne, you and I have seen all that happen on our watch.
Yeah.
From the time that we started in media back in high school and college, we've seen all of this unfold.
And when you said that book was 15 years old?
Yeah, it was published in 2009.
Imagine how much more true everything you just said is now with social media and phones.
Right. Yeah. I think he was on the leading edge of something very important.
Without a doubt. It's gotten to the place now where, and now let's add one other dimension that he did not have at that time. And we could pull out the 4-inch thick binder from Harvard University, which is a very sophisticated study of who owns and controls the media messaging in the United States. Now you get through all four inches of it, and you come down to a simple graph chart that you can find online in lots of places, where people are now onto the reality that there's about 6 major corporations that control the majority of media messaging in the United States of America. From the biggest one, which is Wikipedia. The biggest media influencer in America is Wikipedia, to ABC, and to ABC Disney, to Fox, to Comcast, Universal, NBC. You can go right down the line to the Redstone family and National Amusements and CBS. You can go into all the different pieces and parts and see. And the difference now is that these are corporations who are picking their spots and applying their news application into the niche market that they want to reach, that they can monetize. And the monetization does not depend upon being publicly accepted or being held accountable to subscribers, because basically it's all about clickbait. It's all about data mining. It's all about selling information. It's all about capturing someone's data and then using it in a machine. And that's before we get to the social media giants, which basically are run by 3 entities that dominate what's in virtually every kid's pocket in regards to their cell phones, and which is in most people's heads in regards to social media sites. So this is the additional application, which has turned this whole thing way past steroids. Now we're on to rocket fuel. And what's happened is the concept of siloing. Now, silo's a noun. We're now turning it into a verb. In essence, where these media conglomerates pick their niche, send the material into the silo of that niche, their marketplace, and then just preach what those people respond to. You with me?
Yeah.
So when Fox puts up The World According to Fox, they're being real honest. Melanie, you're right. They're telling you, welcome to your home-based silo. We will feed you what you want to hear.
Yeah, we have to resist that.
And I think they're also saying, we are not NPR, or we are not the New York Times.
Please see the next silo 3 over, please.
Yeah.
What I did in the context of this discussion just in the last few days is really do a search in Scripture on the word truth. Now, that's just using the word truth and not true or, falsehoods. Just looked up the word truth.
In the Greek, Jeff, it's aletheia. Is that right?
Yes, aletheia.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we know from Psalms 52, truth is the opposite of falsehood. From Isaiah 59, there is no justice without truth. From John 1, grace and truth come through Christ. John 8, truth will set you free. Of course, Jesus in John 14 saying that he is the way, the truth, and the life. Romans 1, suppressing truth by their wickedness, rejecting truth in Romans 2, and following evil. But what impacted me the most was Colossians 2, where in Colossians we're taught to not be taken captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. So there is a burden on us to discern.
Could you say that really slow? Not be taken captive by?
Colossians 2:8, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy.
The word philosophy is in the Bible. Can we stop for a moment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which depends on human tradition and elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. We have a responsibility as believers to develop a discernment lens that's based through Scripture, through the lens of Scripture. And what I had to do for example, just one practical example, in the whole Israeli-Hamas conflict, I had to step away from the American media altogether. And I had to go to journalistic sources in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, in individuals who live in Iran, just to get a perspective from a different lens. I wanted to know what objective truth was, because objective truth is not just what they say, but it's what they leave out.
Right. That is so true.
Erwin Lutzer says we should frisk every thought. Comment on that passage. Frisk
I like
every
that
thought.
analogy.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah.
Back to the verse that you read, Melanie. It's amazing. Think about the world we're living in now. We've had at least a generation, maybe a generation and a half or two, that's grown up under postmodern philosophy, which really seeks to undercut the notion of the objective truth that Dave was talking about earlier, or self-evident truth. You have people like Jacques Derrida and structuralism and things like this that basically try to tell people you can't trust anything. You can't trust words. A lot of times you can't trust your senses. You can't trust your eyes. You can't.
So we can't trust him either then for what he's saying, right?
Precisely.
Well, logically, you'd have to say that.
Well, yes, but you're using logic, so
we can't trust logic,
and a bit of martial arts. Yes,
yeah. But I mean, we laugh about it, but that's been taught in classrooms for decades upon decades upon decades, and I think it's infiltrated everybody's thought process now.
Right, and it hinges on the doctrine of autonomy, which is the platform upon which everything then is built. You're exactly right, Alan. So I think it's important for people to know that we're not alone in this conversation. And I think, Wayne, in just a minute, let's get into two contemporary examples from NPR and the New York Times that show that there are people inside the silos of the left who are saying the same thing we are.
Yeah, we'll get to that coming up on the Public Square. Hey, listen, this program exists through our listeners. It's because you support us that we're able to be here on these 200-plus radio stations that Dave mentioned. So thank you for that support, and you can always contact us through our website, thepublicsquare.com. One more thing, and that is that the advertising for this program is you. The advertiser is you. You are the one that spreads the word about the Public Square. So do that if you would. Share the website, share the smartphone app that we have that makes it easy to listen to the program and take it with you on the go. That would be a big help to us. All right, we'll continue this discussion coming up on this edition of the Public Square. Let's continue the discussion today on the Public Square. Always engaging, especially so today, Dave.
Wayne, for the last several months, there have been two stories popping up that sort of affirm the questions that we are asking from a completely different point of view. There's a former New York Times editor by the name of Adam Rubinstein, and he did a very significant essay in The Atlantic, basically exposing his experiences with working with the New York Times. He was supposed to sit in a semi-conservative chair there in the editor's booth, if you will, at the Times. And he had an experience from the time he went to work there to the time that he left there that proved that, in fact, there was no such thing as a conservative chair, a semi-conservative chair, a remotely conservative chair. In fact, he experienced a level of groupthink that caused him to leave one of the most prestigious positions a person could ever have in the United States medium. Now, it's kind of an interesting story because it's become known, at least in our shop, as the chicken sandwich story. And Rob, tell us how it began. How did we come to that name, the chicken sandwich story?
Well, he writes that when he started at the Times, he had to do an icebreaker, and you had to pick out I believe it was a Starburst candy, and then tell a story about it. And he picked out a pink one, I believe. He was going to tell a story about an expensive chicken sandwich it made him think of, but he didn't. He said the Chick-fil-A spicy chicken sandwich. And I believe the article said there was a kind of like a finger snap and an animation. We don't do that here. I believe what was said.
We
don't talk about that here.
Yeah, excuse me. We don't talk about Chick-fil-A.
We don't talk about that here. And he's like, well, and
then everyone snapped their fingers, which is, I guess, the way that you express affirmation.
It's like Dobie Gillis.
Yes, and Maynard G. Krebs. For those of you that are very old, you'll really enjoy that humor.
All right, thanks for outing me, Dave. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
And it wasn't that he didn't like that his favorite sandwich was the chicken sandwich. It was the chicken sandwich from Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, it was because
we don't do that here because they hate gay people.
Because they're chair.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes.
A restaurant elicits that kind of
reaction.
Isn't that kind of over the top?
Among the employees at the highest level at the New York Times. Yeah, you think?
A chicken sandwich restaurant.
Yeah, is there a sandwich that I could mention that would make you guys get mad at me for liking?
Monte Cristo. Don't ever bring that up.
Okay. So this was his opening experience with the New York Times. Of course, he kept the job. He kept on for a good number of years forward. And then he ran into a problem with the process of Senator Tom Cotton wanting to speak to the question of the use of federal troops, which are basically National Guard troops that are federalized in regards to protecting communities and properties against rioting forces. Well, that's a long story. You can read it. We'll put the links in. But in attempting to get Senator Cotton's op-ed piece into the format that the New York Times would permit to be printed, they had to go through lots and lots of steps. Now, we do op-ed pieces. We've done them for years, and we've had them published all over the place. We understand that it's not an easy thing to do, and a lot of times it becomes very controversial because the paper would be interested in seeing your name do an opinion, but a lot of times they want to shape what you say and how you say it. Whether they agree or disagree, they want a heavy hand on the scale. Well, the long and short of the story is the Cotton piece did get printed, and it created absolute mayhem among the finger-snapping employees as well. That experience, along with other things, eventually reached the point in which Mr. Rubenstein left the New York Times and became a whistleblower to the Atlantic.
Yeah, and in that article, they talked about one of the things, Dave, that jumped at me was the fact of the Hunter Biden laptop story. And he said that they said it had been unsubstantiated. And he thought, well, just looking into it because of what had been talked about. But the discussion was it would hurt the chances of Joe Biden being elected. And he thought, well, that's a very scary place to start from in a newsroom about what the outcome may be. That was another one of the things that jumped at me in that piece.
I thought you're supposed to pursue the truth no matter where it goes, right?
This brings us back to the point of people saying that journalism is now activism. And if we're going to silo it, it won't matter. If you don't like it, too bad. So the quest for the truth is now moved to the quest of agenda. And people from inside, in essence, the biggest silos, the silo feeders on the left, are saying it out loud. And it's interesting to watch the media have to unveil this. Now, there's a second story. Now, this is the New York Times, and this is a privately held corporation. Actually, it's a stock-held corporation. It's bigger than that, but it's controlled by the families that actually began this publication years ago. And it's currently in the Salzberger family, and Greg Salzberger is currently in charge. And he's a very young man for that kind of responsibility, but this is the gray lady. This is the big paper. This is the paper of record for so many people across the United States. They're in the midst of this silo reality. All right, but it's their money, okay? It's their money. I'm not paying for the New York Times. Well, I can't lie about it. I do pay for their app.
Yeah.
I pay for their app because if I wasn't paying for their app, I wouldn't be able to have these stories to tell you about this. But I pay for it honestly, okay? And we're not stealing the information, all right? We're participating to get the data to be able to bring it forward. But let's go to something that we are all paying for, because there's a similar story with NPR.
Oh, yeah.
There was a business editor at NPR, Yuri Berliner, who had been there 25 years. And through that 25 years, he basically said that NPR was a fabric of America. You know, it was a swath of America based upon the people that were listening. But then over the 25 years, he saw how that had moved so dramatically, and their listeners and the people who were consuming their content were no longer a swath of America. They were far leaning left. They were nowhere near the middle. And I believe there was roughly 9%, 10% of conservatives were all that were left listening to the program. And he thought that was, unheard of, and for what their call and what they were supposed to be doing at NPR.
I think it's important to mention that Yuri Berliner, he's not a conservative.
Right.
You read in his article here, I would call him a liberal, but he believed in pursuing the truth wherever it would happen to go, even if it went against his ideas about other things.
Yeah. And he talked about how NPR constantly went to Adam Schiff, and Adam Schiff was basically
the story of the Russian collusion.
Yes, Russia collusion, and was basically those talking points from the congressman's office were basically the NPR headlines or the NPR stories. That's what they were going with constantly.
And that led to a point of no credibility, because when the Mueller report came out, and there was no evidence when Congressman Schiff had constantly been talking about, I've got all this evidence, and the bag was empty, then they had a credibility problem, which leads to a problem of trust with the audience. You know, if story after story, you're going to have a swing and a miss, or a strikeout after so many swings and misses. Where do you go from there if you don't trust the source to be truthful?
Well, and we're not big fans of political parties here, but this is telling in the story. Did we mention from that piece you guys are discussing? He says that in D.C., where NPR is headquartered, 87 registered Democrats are working in editorial positions at NPR, and 0 Republicans. So, and again, we're not partisan folks ourselves, but that's just very telling.
Yeah.
There's 0 ideological diversity amongst the editorial staff at NPR's DC headquarters.
Well, when he went public with his views, it didn't go well. And we'll pick up the story there when we continue on the Public Square.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Back with you on the Public Square now on the team. Here we've been discussing this NPR staffer who kind of had a contrarian opinion to how NPR is operating. And Rob, there's more to the story.
There is. When COVID first happened, think back to January of 2020, people were talking about it happening in China. They weren't sure. Was it a lab leak? Was it created? We know the story of did it come from bats at a market? All that. They were trying to look at it objectively and do some research and do things. And NPR didn't want to cover it in that way. They just kind of wanted to have it their own little way, whatever was said, and not look at it objectively. And that was another thing where Mr. Berliner was just not happy. He didn't think it was an objective approach in regards to journalism on how a story would be covered. And that story obviously had world implications written all over it. And we've seen so many changes at NPR.
Yes, and there's a new sheriff in town at NPR, right, Rob? There's a new CEO.
Yes, Catherine Marr is the new CEO of NPR. And when you look at her past, from the things that she tweeted out against one former president of the United States, when you look at how, I'll use, again, I'm famous for using air quotes in radio. I know you're not supposed to, but the woke tweets that have been sent by her in the past, that raises a lot of questions and concerns about how someone could look at something objectively and cover it when you know how they feel about it and what they've written about it in the past and what that bias and slant is going to look like.
So the point is that people are coming out of the silos all over the place saying, we've lost our way. We have lost our way. And this is significant. This isn't a small reality. This is not a small reality. Now, as we've come to this conversation, we're trying to look at it from a position of truth and culture over time and history. We're not carrying water for a party or a publication or any outlet. We think in regards to NPR, as long as NPR is going to continue to take taxpayer dollars and silo a singular message that we're being forced to pay for, and whether you're paying for it at the state level through the university radio stations or the federal level through grant money and tax dollars, this should stop. We should be able to stop this process.
By the way, he's no longer with NPR. Let's point that out, right?
Right.
Correct.
Wayne, do you remember years ago, you and I went to a prayer breakfast in Hollywood?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it was a prayer breakfast for American media.
Mm-hmm.
And there was organization then that was actually figuring out how to do a calendar to pray for members of the media, left, right, middle, in between, without judgment, to pray.
I get their monthly prayer calendar today.
For people. Now, is that group still out there?
Yes, the mediator, yeah.
So from that inspirational moment, it's been on my mind, and it's been on the mind of many people across this country, to pray for the American media. Let me suggest that rather than complaining about the affliction that we are now caught up in, what if we prayed? What if we would pray? Now you say, well, my goodness, who can pray against these giant conglomerates? We're not praying against people. We're not praying against anything. We're praying for the revelation of truth. We're praying that God would help these people, that God would help everyone in media. Now, how would you go about praying for media? There's lots of organizations online that have actually picked up this mantle. And I would submit to you that you can go to lots of different websites. Wayne, you've got one that you're frequenting.
Yeah, Master Media International is the organization. I'm sure if you just Google that, the website will come up. But Master Media International, Dan Ruppel is the head of that now.
Intercessors for America is another one. But I'll tell you, it's as simple as something that anyone can do. You can take a simple piece of paper. I got one right here. All right. And I have the simple piece of paper, and I have listed all of not all, but I've listed maybe 20, maybe 30 of the biggest players in American media that, quite honestly, are siloed, seriously left. And to me, it's the world according to them. And they're kind of scary people. I put their names there. And I've actually gone through the Harvard study. You can go online. You can find out all this information. It's simple to do. And I put this list and I put their names. The names of the people that are in charge, who either own it or control it. I put those names there. So you've got ABC Disney, you've got CBS National Amusements, you've got Comcast, AT&T, plus CNN. You've got the Fox family, the Zuckerbergs, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, the Sulzberger family, Elon Musk. You can go on and on. Make up your own list as you feel led. I've got that list. On the flip side, I've got everybody in media that I know that we have the privilege to work with that I think are trying to do the right thing. Now, pray however you want. I pray God deliver all the people on the bad list, that God will deliver them from evil and bring them to the light of truth, that God will have mercy on them and me alike. And the people on the other side, I pray that God will cause them to also come to the same light, and that God will continue to prosper them, and that the Lord of the harvest will send forth more people into his harvest field. So instead of simply bellyaching or living in a silo, what if we actually started to pray every day? I take this list, stick it right in my Bible, and every morning where I start my reading, this is the first thing I pray for. And what's happened since I started this? It's amazing to me. Now, please understand, this is almost facetious in what I'm saying. But one thing I have noticed is in praying, CEOs start changing. Remember that whole Disney thing? And how all of a sudden the CEO changed and was out and the whole thing started to go in a different direction? Well, was that because Dave Zanotti was praying? No, absolutely not. But I was praying. But I also know there are millions of other people praying also.
It's hard to maintain anger and fury and worry when you're praying about something. When I'm praying for somebody or for a company, instead of me grousing all the time, did you see what they said on CNN or Fox News? Rah, 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 constantly an uproar. What if I'm praying? That attitude is hard to maintain. And instead, I'm much more peaceful.
So now we're praying, dear Lord, have mercy on the people at NPR. God, help them. And help me too, Jesus. I'm not better than them. I'm not worse than them. I'm not smarter than them. Lord, have mercy on us all. God, deliver us all from evil. And doggone, here comes Yuri Berliner coming out saying, I got to tell you what's going on in there. I can't take it anymore. Well, you know what, Yuri? Remember, people have been praying for you. Didn't know your name, but now we do. So now we're going to pray for you even more. Now, are we trying to pray people into the conformity of our politics? Oh, come on. Nobody's politics are that good. What we're doing is we're asking the Lord of life to reveal truth to all of us. How can that be wrong? You know, Wayne, what I found interesting?
What?
The folks that do this professionally and who have relationships with people in the media, they find themselves praying for their families, for their children, for their futures, for their pets, for their careers. Very few people turn down prayer.
I've heard so many stories of spiritual impact simply because someone mentioned I'm praying for you.
So it seems to me that wouldn't this be the greatest tool in regards to principalities and powers, in regards to people whose objectives are to influence the minds and the hearts of individuals, is to lay them before the ultimate truth of the universe, the one.
Great strategy to follow up this conversation today on The Public Square. If you joined us late in the middle, maybe you want to go back online and listen to the whole thing, thepublicsquare.com. We'll see you next time.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.